Morning. My name is Steve Marr. I'm with Risk Management Professionals, and I'd like to welcome you to our SEMS, or Offshore Facility SEMS webinar series. Today we'll be focusing on management change and pre-startup reviews, and we're going to try to do the same thing we've done in our other SEMS series webinars and provide tips, some insights on how to pull the program together in the most effective way possible. But before we get started and before I introduce our speakers, one of which is me, I'd like to go ahead and talk about the logistics for this. The communications mechanism we're using for our webinar series is a WebEx platform, and for that reason, it enables two-way communication. All the participants are being put on mute for the duration of the presentation so that other participants can not be distracted by paper shuffling, phone calls, exterior meetings, etc. So if at a later time during the broadcast, and we will open up for question and answer towards the end, there's an interest in participating, sharing comments or feedback, just go ahead and use your chat window to send a message to our producer, Solveig Sather, who goes by the moniker RMP Corp on your screen, and go ahead and identify to her what you'd like to do. And that also works too for questions. If you have questions at the end and would like to send them to the producer and us to reiterate the question, that's just fine. And also, if you have any technical difficulties during the course of the webinar, please feel free to either use the chat window for questions to get our producer's attention, or go ahead and call the number on your screen, 877-532-0806, and somebody will be at least willing to listen to you and hopefully help you get your technical issues resolved so that everything works fine. Right now, you should be seeing an image of me in your upper right-hand corner of your screen. Feel free to use your mouse to grab the extent of that window and adjust it to whatever size is comfortable for you. And on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see the first slide of a PowerPoint, our PowerPoint presentation on MOC and PSSR. All right, that pretty much covers the logistical issues. We'll be speaking for about 45 minutes today. And as I mentioned, we'll have a nice question and answer session so that you can bring up additional points or pose questions to the speakers. Key speakers today, myself, Steve Marr, and also Ken Hufford. We're engineers on the staff at Risk Management Professionals. As I mentioned before, our objective here is to use our insights and our background from applying the various elements of these regulatory programs, helping clients out as part of our engineering consulting activities. And we use it for internal training and also to broadcast it externally so that people can benefit from a lot of the experiences and history that we have in dealing with these kind of issues. I'll be providing a little bit of, well actually, let's go over the agenda real quickly. I'll be providing a little bit of background on key driving forces for these regulatory requirements that all hover on safety management systems. I'll be drawing parallels between offshore and onshore safety management system regulatory development and the key elements, comparing SEMS to these other programs, and drawing some conclusions on what sort of elements can be useful and maybe how to structure effective implementation at your company. Then I'd like to turn it over to Ken for MOC and PSSR, and also open up for questions, references, and resources. I'm going to go ahead and hold for a couple of minutes here. Okay, so what I'd like to do is go ahead and get started with a little bit of background, driving forces in the evolution of these regulatory requirements. We do get, as safety professionals, and most of the people who are participating today are safety professionals responsible for the safety of personnel, the community around your facility, and also protection of the environment. We do get reminders of how important our job is, and how if safety is not managed properly, that things can go wrong. And it's all about managing the safety elements at your facility that are the pivotal issues for all of these regulatory programs. The basis for most of these programs are unfortunate tragedies that have been pivotal events that have occurred that have really awakened us to the importance of safety at our facility, the potential for catastrophe, and significant consequences when you're dealing with highly hazardous materials. And it's these pivotal events highlighted in red on your screen that have really prompted a lot of the regulatory requirements and developments that have occurred. When you look at Mexico City, Bhopal that occurred in 1984, Piper Alpha, the tragedy for the offshore facility in UK waters, Texas City, and also the 2010 Deepwater Horizon accident and Macondo well release, there's a lot of common elements. Key observations that you can make are that a lot of these key tragedies result in impact on people's lives, impact on the environment, business interruption, result in lost confidence in contracts, increased regulation. But if you look at the characteristics, it's usually not that you're pushing the boundaries of technology. Usually they're relatively simple precursors and initiating events and very straightforward root causes that kind of hover around a failure to maintain the design intent. The folks who design your facility designed it for a certain purpose with specific safety margins to make sure that those margins aren't compromised, design limits challenged, and accidents occur. If the facility is being managed and those safety margins are compromised, that tends to eat away at that safety margin and result in many cases in accidents that can cause, in some cases, some serious tragedies. When you look at ways to improve that, again, hovering around management of safety and safety management systems, it's not really looking at specific actions or specific items, but really by managing how you're doing your business, how you're adhering to your safety programs on site, and really your safety culture and the various management systems associated with that. If you look at the evolution of these different programs, there's a lot of common elements here in terms of how things transpired. I actually had the privilege of being involved with the Center for Chemical Process Safety Technical Steering Committee in the mid-'80s as industry first responded to the Bhopal accident and the Mexico City tragedies. And one of the first things that was looked at was management systems. And one of the first things that was done by the Center for Chemical Process Safety, if you look at the upper arrow on the left, is the development in 1987 of technical management guidelines. The really interesting thing, in fact, well, let me get back to that in a second. When you're looking at the technical management guidelines, they eventually were adopted by the API as part of Recommended Practice 750 in 1990 for petroleum facilities. And those documents were later evolved by OSHA into Process Safety Management in 1992 and risk management programs by the EPA in 1996. So for onshore facilities in the United States, that evolution of regulatory requirements was catalyzed by the Bhopal tragedies. Industry did respond first and was very proactive, but the legislation occurred later to help make sure that applications were uniform and fair to all industry. If you look at offshore systems, in the United States, there have been a lot of developments. It was recognized that the same kind of management system issues that existed for the Bhopal tragedy and that were used for the evolution of PSM and RMP really did apply to offshore facilities too. I had the privilege of being involved in 1990 with a key project where we looked at a whole variety of offshore facilities, next generation platforms, and looked at the application of the new process safety shutdown systems. When you're looking at those kind of applications, when you're looking at protecting those facilities, industry did take a lot of key roles. API came up with its Safety Environmental Management program, and API recommended Practice 75, and that eventually evolved later into what we're looking at that's promulgated by BOEMRE for Safety and Environmental Management Systems. So for offshore facilities outside U.S. waters, the Piper Alpha tragedy in 1988 was the key pivotal event that resulted in the formulation of safety cases and the application of those in many areas around the United Kingdom and other parts of the world, and not only for offshore facilities but onshore facilities. A common thread, whether you're looking at onshore U.S., offshore United States, or offshore and onshore throughout the world, is these safety management systems. And Interestingly enough, when you look at the initial technical management guidelines and the key elements that were put together by the Center for Chemical Process Safety in 1987, and you compare that to the key elements that people look at now for process safety management, risk management programs, and safety and environmental management systems, you really see more commonality than not. So a lot of these key elements have been looked at by thousands of professionals for decades as the key items to look at, to address, to have a healthy safety management system. So there's a lot of commonality, and we'll be talking more about the correlations between offshore and onshore and different types of facilities shortly. What I'd like to do is begin comparing those. And really a key thing that I'd like to bring out as part of this webinar is the fact that you've got a lot of resources out there because of these overlapping requirements. If you look at safety and environmental management systems, again, an evolution of this safety environmental management program that was put together by the American Petroleum Institute as part of Recommended Practice 75. The key elements of this that were promulgated by DOE-MRE last year as part of 30 CFR Part 250 include a lot of elements that look familiar to anybody who's a practitioner in PSM and RMP. For safety and environmental management systems, you've got safety and environmental information, a key platform for providing information to evaluate safety properly, hazards analysis, management of change, operating procedures, safe work practices, training, mechanical integrity, pre-startup reviews, emergency response and control, incident investigation, auditing of these elements to make sure that things are being implemented properly. And these are all things that work together to form a comprehensive safety management system. The circles in red on the left are elements that not only were the formulation of the core of safety environmental management systems and were the 4 key elements in the 2006 version before the recent update in 2010. But if you look at it, hazards analysis, management of change, operating procedures, and mechanical integrity are things that a lot of people have been challenged with. There have been a lot of citations issued, and there are key things that people need to focus on to maintain the safety and integrity at their facilities. When you look at these different programs that I'm talking about, whether you're looking at offshore U.S. and safety environmental management systems, or you're looking at onshore for PSM and RMP, if you look at the screen, the green area, these are elements that are in common to all these programs. There's more in common than not. That reinforces the importance of the elements, the fact that a lot of people across many industries, many different applications have found these to be some of the key things that, when implemented, can help control safety at your facility. This table, I'm not going to go through this in detail, provides a roadmap for comparing the different regulatory areas of SEMS, PSM, and RMP, and showing you this overlap and providing you with a roadmap for cross-comparison. One of the key things that I'd like to share with you today is that if you're an offshore facility operator that's got a lot to do by November 15th, 2011 to implement your safety and environmental management system at your facility, there's a lot of these elements that are common to these other prevention programs. We've looked at that comparison. And the nice thing is if you're an offshore facility that's got business units that also have onshore facilities, you can tap into those resources, the technology, a lot of the programs that have been developed, and maybe even establish a common program across your entire business for dealing with these different types of facilities. So there may be a lot of resources available to you. We're consultants. We actually help people set these programs up. But if you're an offshore facility operator and you've got onshore facilities, you may have a lot of resources internally to help you pull these programs together. One of the other things to keep in mind when you're looking at strategies for implementing this is there are a lot of activities encompassed by this. There's a lot of opportunity for minimizing duplication, looking at these similar objectives for all these performance-based safety management system requirements, and also use these overlaps to minimize duplication, make your program more efficient and more robust at the same time. If you can pull this together and minimize the duplication, you can really do a lot of benefit for the facility and for your business. We recommend starting simple, weaving existing elements into new programs, looking at the results, doing a gap analysis to see if there are improvement areas and what hasn't been done, and as necessary, update and enhance the completeness of your existing analyses. And also, November 15th is right around the corner. There's a lot to do, and all these things, there's a lot of different things that need to be done as part of this program. Now, as I mentioned before, these are all different elements that have to be implemented. One of the key elements for this is management of change and pre-startup reviews. This is something that's been can cause a lot of snafus for people and has had trouble for implementation across a lot of facilities for quite a bit of time. And what I want to do is introduce Ken Hufford to you to share some insights on how to implement this effectively. Ken?
Thanks, Steve. My name's Ken Hufford, and this morning I'm going to be presenting on management of change and pre-startup review. Management of change and pre-startup review are key elements to the SENS program, and one of the key things is that basically all your offshore facilities are often undergoing changes and improvements. And the purpose of this is to make sure that these changes actually are reviewed and have a sound technical basis, as well as aren't going to compromise safety or the environment. And we're on the, do you want to switch, go forward a slide or something? How do I, oh, I need to control it, sorry, yeah. Yeah, my bad. Anyway, sorry, so as I was saying, I'm just going to go over the management of change requirements. Some of the basic requirements are that facility has to actually develop written procedures for the management of change. And basically, you need to do this kind of procedure whenever you have changes in your equipment, your operating procedures, any kind of changes in personnel or materials or operating conditions. So really, any not-in-kind changes. So when I say not-in-kind, what I mean is if you're going to be changing, for example, if you have a pump and you have a different pump that is completely different, say it has 3 times the capacity and has completely different operating pressures, then you need to follow the management change procedures. However, if it's extremely similar, or obviously if it's the same exact pump, then you don't need to follow management change procedures because there shouldn't really be much of a change. All management changes need to be implemented and need to be reviewed prior to their implementation. So a lot of times what happens is a management change form or checklist gets started prior to the change, but maybe somewhere along the line gets lost, and then they implement the change, and then later they find it and they say, oh crap, we didn't fill out this form, and then they end up signing it later. That kind of defeats the purpose. So one of the requirements is obviously to ensure that you finish this management change before you actually implement the changes. Also, another requirement is that employees, including contractors, need to review these changes, because one of the key things about a management change and pre-startup review is that there's lines of communication between the management and the operators. A lot of times what happens is the management has plans, and then they want to make changes to the procedures, and then they don't necessarily tell their employees. Or, for example, the other way around, if maybe the operators are changing a pump and they don't necessarily tell management because they don't think it's a big deal. So the idea behind management change often is to make sure that there's communication between the operators and management. In the management change, some of the requirements are for actually including in the procedures. You can include more things, but these are the absolute minimum things you need to cover, or you need to cover the technical basis of the change. So basically, why are we making this change? Is it going to be something wrong?
I just have a slide.
Sorry, hold on a second. Thanks for being patient, everyone.
There we go. Okay.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
All right, sorry about that. Where was I? So we need to review the technical basis of the change. So we need to review why we're making the change. And, this is kind of, if you're going to make highlighting a good points of why you're putting it in, this is where you say, we're putting in this change because it's going to increase our operating, our operating ability, or, it's just the old equipment was breaking down or something like that, so we need to replace it. Next, you need to evaluate the impacts on safety and environment. And sometimes it's, if it's a smaller management change, say you're just changing the amount of personnel, so you're adding more personnel, maybe there isn't a negative change on the safety environment. But oftentimes, if you're making a major change, you may need to use a hazard analysis. So you need to use some kind of documented form to show. Oh, sorry about that. To show why the change is going to be safe, why you have enough safeguards to prevent any kind of environmental or safety accidents. You need to also put what kind of time period you're looking at, because a lot of management change, they can range. So again, if you're doing a small project, it could be turned around in the next week. Or if you're doing a very large project, it could take 6 months to a year. And then finally, you need management approval for the change. So again, this goes back to the lines of communication between operators and management to show that they're communicating over the change and they've discussed it. Management of change often results in a change in procedures, and whenever you have a change in operating procedures, that needs to be documented and dated. So I'm going to go over some of the common deficiencies later, but that's a key point because almost all management change are going to result in some kind of updates to procedures, which in turn results in training that needs to be done. So if you go to the next step is, or sorry, I'm going out of order, but you need to do training and operating procedures after every management of change. Management of change procedures, again, kind of don't apply to when you're doing an in-kind replacement. Is everything okay, Sylvain? Is it like skipping slides or something? It might be on some kind of timer or something, I guess, changing pages. Okay. Anyway, so sorry. Again, if you're doing an in-kind change, then you don't have to do management change procedures. But if you're doing a replacement that's not in kind, then you need to follow them. Next, pre-start review. Pre-start review is really an extension of the management of change, but really applies if you're doing a more major change. So for example, again, back to the pump example, if you're just switching out a pump, and maybe it's a different brand, so there's going to be some slight differences. You don't need to do a pre-start review. But if you're changing everything about the operation or just changing like a large portion of the operating procedures, then maybe you need to do a pre-start review. So, for example, some of the things that need to be reviewed during pre-start review is construction equipment need to be in accordance with construction standards and specifications. Again, all the safety, all the operating procedures, all the emergency procedures need to be updated and they need to be reviewed. Safety and environmental information, so those are elements of SEMS, need to be current. So again, if you have new equipment, that means obviously your equipment and safety information need to be updated. Hazard analysis. So basically that can be a good borderline to show when you might need to do a pre-startup review. Because if you need to do a hazard analysis, it probably also is going to require a pre-start review because it might be a major change. Now, again, this kind of goes back to if you don't implement your changes, for example, recommendations stemming from a hazard analysis, before you'd actually do the change, then it kind of defeats the purpose. So one of the requirements is to make sure that all recommendations stemming from a hazard analysis are closed. Training also has to be complete. Again, this goes back to you need to make sure that everything is done before you actually make the change. So training and operating procedures need to be updated. Programs, all programs, because the SEMS has other programs. Skipping forward again, sorry. SEMS has programs that need to be updated, so make sure all of them are updated prior to the change. And lastly, safe work practices are in place. Deepwater Horizon, one of the this is excerpt actually from the findings of the BP report, and one of their findings was that essentially when they're dealing with the centralizers, they had the 6 centralizers on site, and that they were shipping 15 more because I guess Halliburton wanted to have 21, and so when they had the 15, they thought maybe they're the incorrect centralizers, and since they didn't have MOC procedures, they didn't really review to figure out whether or not they were incorrect, and so obviously they found out later that they were correct. And basically that there was a risk in this, and that when they didn't follow the MOC procedures, they could have identified other hazards that might have come along with it that obviously resulted in the Deepwater Horizon incident. So basically their conclusion from the report was that improved technical assurance and risk management and management of change by the well team would have raised awareness and then thus would have helped mitigate the disaster. Common deficiencies, some common deficiencies with the MOC and PSSR process. I'm going to go in more detail in the next slide, so I'll just kind of read them off real quick. MOC procedures are not current or used. That's probably the most common for both of these, or really any of the SEMS elements, is that they either go through neglect or they don't exist. SEMS documentation is not reflected to show that there was a change. There's a failure to review MOC with employees and contractors. For pre-start safety review, again, maybe the written procedures don't exist. the pre-start review documentation is not complete or kept on file. That's a large problem because, again, documentation is a huge part of these SEMS programs. And finally, documentation is not completed or signed off until after startup. So again, going back to it, the procedure was started and then forgotten about and then somehow got finished later after the completed change. So now I'm kind of going to go over how you can fix these deficiencies and how to correct them. So for one, the first one is MOC procedure not current or used. A lot of times the major problem with the MOC procedures is either too complicated or too simple. The problem is if they're too complicated, you have, I hand over a 12-page packet and then there's all these steps and it's, it looks like overkill to most people, especially when it's a small MOC and then people don't want to follow it. The problem with that is, if you want people to do things, you have to keep it simple and yet you need to be encompassing. So one of the things you can do to improve that is, if you have flow charts or you make sure you have training on it, then you can make sure that people understand the process and first of all, they don't think it's overkill because they understand it and so it's actually simple. But at the same time, you can't have it be too simple because if it becomes a rubber stamp document, it kind of defeats the whole purpose of doing it. So again, I kind of showed you can have a flow chart kind of show, and you can actually have your form and flow chart kind of go together. So if you have, field 1 and then you have your step 1 in your flow chart, and it kind of correlates, and that can kind of help people get guided along the MOC process so they don't feel overwhelmed by it. You can also provide examples of in-kind and not in-kind changes so that people don't get confused and say, well, I'm not really sure when to do it. Because one of the key things is getting this ingrained in the culture for the management and the operators so that they get used to it and it just becomes, we're doing a change, so we do the MOC process. That's really the key to defeating this most common deficiency. In fact, for all the SEMS elements is because people aren't necessarily familiar with it, and it's not that they don't want to do it, it's just they're not used to it. So once you get people used to it, then it solves basically almost all the problems, I'd say, with these kind of programs. The next deficiency is SEMS documentation isn't updated. One of the pre-startup safety review actually pre-startup review actually kind of helps with this because pre-startup review exists as a checklist, a secondary checklist to make sure that all the documentation got complete. But say for example you're not doing your pre-startup review or it doesn't require a pre-startup review. Some of the things you can do that actually helps. Again, this is more of a global SEMS tip is to have a master copy of your program. A lot of times the problem is that there's a bunch of paper copies floating around and you might have version 1 over here and version 2 over here and version 3 over here. So operators and management can get confused as to which is actually the most current and which one they should be using. So one of the key things you can do is you can have a master copy of the program. And a lot of times the easiest way to do this nowadays is to have, if you have a server or if you can have like a central computer, you can keep master copies of the editable files on there. And so that only, you have access, first of all, everyone has access to look at them, but hopefully only one person has access to change them. Because another problem can be is if you do have it on a server and everyone has access, then people can all be making different changes and maybe they don't get reviewed. Also, specifically for MOC and PSSR, some of the requirements for MOC and PSSR, as I explained, actually require you to keep the documentation. So what you can do is whenever you complete an MOC or PSSR, make sure that a copy of the updated, say you make an update to the procedures, that rev of the procedures should probably be stapled or kept or filed with the MOC so it shows that you actually update the procedures with the MOC. More common deficiencies. To kind of go over training again, I think a huge part of doing MOCs and PSSRs is training. You need to get your operators to buy into it and your management to buy into it so that everyone's on the same page and actually wants to do this and sees the benefits in doing an MOC or PSSR. Employees, you can have meetings and you want to do training to show exactly how this is done. Again, you can have flow charts and you should do some kind of presentation so that they understand and it gets into the culture. Although the program's kind of overseen usually by 1 or 2 people, everyone should really be familiar with it. And I think I want to turn this back over to Steve, so thank you. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties. I'm not sure what happened.
They're minor. No, these are minor technical difficulties today. Anytime you deal with all this computer stuff, very serious. All right, Ken, thank you very much. Just to reinforce something that Ken did say is a key challenge for offshore facilities is information sharing and the ability to get access to the information that you need. A lot of times key design information is at an onshore office, whereas the facility is offshore, and a lot of the people that need to interact are in different locations, and they need to get access to this information to do a quality management change and also pre-startup review. So these issues of information sharing, getting access to it, are more acute for a lot of the offshore operators, and a lot of them are using various software programs to try to pull all these together. For those of you who've looked at our SEMS solution software demo that existed, that we did a couple months ago, you'll see that there's a variety of programs and software packages out there that help you manage these things. One of the things I did want to mention to you in terms of resources that we've done, this is part of our ongoing offshore facility SEMS webinar series. We've looked at a lot of the different elements so far. We've looked at hazards analysis, mechanical integrity programs, safety and environmental information, how to do operating procedures properly, some advanced topics that a lot of people are applying, like bow tie analysis. All these are available on our website at the address that was provided earlier, www.sems1.com/offshorewebinars.html. And these resources are available to you. All the webinars that we do are recorded, and you're welcome to use them and also share them. Coming up for our next one on July 21st is to really take off for a lot of things that people are doing right now and help you get it done efficiently, and that's doing a gap analysis or an audit of your program to see what elements may need further help. A lot of people are in the process of assembling their programs based on their existing practices, and as the Offshore Operating Committee is pulling a gap analysis program together, we've done a lot of compliance audits at Risk Management Professionals, and this July 21st webinar is to try to pull all that together and help you or help get program audit activities and audit protocol together so you can perform an effective audit. That's coming up on July 21st. Other things that are coming up, job safety analysis is those of you who tune into our hazards analysis webinar, job safety analysis is another key element of hazards analysis. It's a little different from a lot of the PSM and RMP programs. The PSM and RMP tended to focus on hazard studies and those kind of programs, whereas the offshore facilities, they wanted to take a look at more the various steps that operators do and how that interfaces with operating procedures. July 28th, we'll be looking at the ProSaint software package that helps pull that together, enables you to get the job safety analysis work done, as well as interfacing that and helping create operating procedures. August 9th, we wanted to talk about training, contractor safety, and implementation of safe work practices. And incident investigation on September 13th should be very useful, and these are important elements, again, of the SEMS program. On September 21st and 22nd, in our Irvine Training Center, we're going to be doing a 2-day bow tie boot camp, and that'll be done in conjunction with CGE risk programs, risk management specialists. October 10th, we're going to be looking at offshore facility emergency action plans, and at that point, we'll have looked at all the key elements of safety and environmental management systems in preparation for your November 15th, 2011 deadline. What I want to do is open it up for questions. Basically, you can provide questions on your chat interface. If you'd like to have your mic open up so you can provide comments or questions to all the participants, that's also fine. And also, while you're thinking of questions, I did want to mention a key thing about management change for engineering contractors. The focus of the Safety Environmental Management System and also Ken's presentation was really applying MOC and PSSR to operating facilities. Very important, and that's where the rubber meets the road with respect to controlling safety at operating facilities. One of the things that a lot of the engineering contractors that are designing new systems or new facilities have to deal with is the application of MOC during the design process. It's a little bit of a different animal. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to call me. But we found a lot of times that they tend to get themselves wrapped around the axle because as you evolve the design, obviously you're making a lot of changes And if you apply the management of change process too early, it gets quite untenable in terms of trying to manage it and deal with all the little things that are changed constantly as you're evolving a design. One of the things that we found that works a little bit more effectively is having various breakpoints in your design where you pull together all the changes, then update your hazard and operability study or other mechanism for hazards analysis. And you do that periodically rather than trying to deal with MOC or do a lot of the paperwork for every little change that's made. So again, if you need any other tips associated with that or you have any questions on that, you can ask now or please feel free to give me a call. So regarding the webinar that we've done, Solveig, any questions? Okay, I guess we've done a real good job. In that case, thank you for tuning in. Appreciate your attendance at our during our SEMS webinar series, and I hope you're able to tune in for the next one on July 21st. Thank you. And end transmission and end recording.